Oh, look at this, you just stumbled into something biblical without even realizing it. A beautiful accidental exorcist, an unconscious spiritual fumigator, stepping into a scene like it was just another ordinary Tuesday. Yet the moment you crossed that threshold, everything shifted. The walls that once seemed to bleed simply went still. The shadows that clung to the corners retreated, and the whispers that had echoed through the air fell silent. A curse that had haunted for generations suddenly packed its bags and vanished, unable to survive the weight of your presence, unable to endure the scent of purpose you unknowingly carried. You didn't notice, did you, that the temperature in the room climbed as if the house itself exhaled after centuries of suffocation? You didn't see how the black mold in the corners dissolved like it had never existed, how the flies fell dead mid-flight, their buzzing silenced in an instant. While your thoughts drifted to dinner or your phone or that tune stuck in your head, you were simultaneously conducting a spiritual genocide against entities so ancient they had lawyers in hell drafting complaints about your existence. Let me tell you what really happened when you walked through that door, because you're still sitting there a little confused. You're wondering why the house feels different, why the air tastes lighter, why the heaviness in your chest suddenly lifted. You might chalk it up to coincidence or imagination, maybe even just a good day. But no, my friend. What actually happened is that you accidentally became the nightmare that nightmares themselves warn their children about. They had been there for decades, parasites and ancient squatters feeding off misery, recycling trauma, and fermenting depression into the very walls. Generations of suffering became their feast, their home, their empire. And then you appeared, radiating something they couldn't metabolize, something that burned their tongues when they tried to consume your energy. Your presence was poison to them, not because you tried to fight, but because you simply existed in a frequency they couldn't endure. Faced with you, they chose to scatter, to dissolve, to abandon everything they had built, rather than endure the unbearable force of whatever you are. Do you want to know why they ran? Why they scattered like roaches when the light hit? Why a century of darkness surrendered without a fight? It's because you are not normal. You are not regular. You are not one of the sleepwalkers they're used to preying upon. You are something entirely different, something their ancient protocols never prepared them for. Most people step into haunted spaces and negotiate. They compromise, they coexist. They accept the weight of the darkness as part of life. But you didn't even acknowledge them. You walked in as if you owned the deed to reality itself, and they felt it. The unshakable certainty, the unconscious authority that forces demons to double-check their contracts. When you first stepped into that space, they tried to read you. They scanned for weakness, searching for the usual cracks they could exploit: fear, trauma, vulnerability. But what they uncovered instead made them recoil. Where they expected wounds, they found wisdom. Where they anticipated trembling fear, they ran into unyielding fury. Where they thought they'd cornered another victim, they found a battle-hardened veteran of wars they couldn't even pronounce. And in that moment, they understood something chilling. They were no longer the predators. You've walked through hell, haven't you? Not the staged theatrics of a haunted house, but the kind of soul-destroying, reality-bending, identity-shattering hell that leaves people unrecognizable. You've had your heart ripped out by smiling faces who claim to love you. You've been betrayed by bloodlines, abandoned in your darkest hours, and somehow survived it all. That survival alone makes you more terrifying than any ghost story, because it's written into your very being. So when you walked in absent-mindedly humming that song, not even trying to banish or cleanse, something fundamental shifted in the spiritual ecosystem. You weren't reciting prayers, burning sage, or waving protective charms. You were simply existing at full capacity, and that alone was catastrophic for anything feeding on weakness. Because here's the truth about demons, entities, and parasites. They're not powerful, not really. They're just persistent, They're emotional vampires, spiritual leeches, metaphysical mosquitoes. They thrive in one place only, the gap between who you are and who you think you are. But you close that gap without even realizing it. You integrated your shadow while stirring your coffee, alchemized your trauma in the middle of daily commutes, and transformed pain into power so naturally that you didn't even notice the metamorphosis. Somewhere along the line, you became untouchable. So when you walked through that door draped in processed darkness, wearing it like armor forged in fire, they recognized instantly they were outmatched. They could smell it on you. The scent of someone who had been broken and refused to stay broken. The frequency of someone who had died inside and chosen resurrection. The radiation of a soul who had made peace with their own demons, and because of that, became immune to everyone else's. You didn't need holy water. You were holy water. You didn't require protection. You were the protection. And the irony? They probably still tried to rattle you at first. They likely threw every classic trick in the book. Cold spots, shifting shadows, whispers dripping from the walls. But what is that to someone like you? You've been gaslit by professionals. You've been terrorized by people who claim to love you. You've been haunted by memories so sharp they make these entities look like amateurs putting on a cheap stage play. What's a creaking floorboard to someone who's heard their sanity splinter in the silence? What's a cold draft to someone who's felt their soul freeze? What's a whisper in the dark to someone who's been deafened by screams of betrayal in broad daylight? You're not afraid of the dark anymore. You've been the dark. You've lived inside it, breathed it, digested it, and when you emerged, you came out glowing, carrying light that no shadow dares to challenge. They must have panicked the moment they realized their usual tactics weren't working. When you didn't flinch at their presence, when you refused to acknowledge their little performance, when you starved them of the fear they needed to feed on, it was like a vampire trying to sink its teeth into a mirror. All they found staring back at them was their own reflection, and they hated what it revealed. In your presence, they weren't powerful ancient beings anymore. They were exposed for what they truly were. Parasites, dependencies, crutches for people who hadn't yet learned to navigate their own darkness. And you had already graduated from that school with honors, with scars as your diploma, with a doctorate in surviving the unsurvivable. So they left. They had no choice. When confronted with someone who had endured worse than anything they could manufacture, their only option was evacuation. What you thought was just an energy shift was, in reality, a mass exodus, a spiritual fire drill where every negative entity within 5 miles received the same urgent message: clear out, the real monster has arrived. And the most brutal part? You weren't even trying. You weren't summoning anything. You weren't declaring war. You weren't staging rituals. You were simply being yourself. And yourself, in its raw and processed form, just happens to be their kryptonite. Your existence alone functions as an exorcism. Your presence is purification. Every breath you take is biblical pest control. Even now, they're likely warning others, whispering across whatever networks they use to communicate. Don't go near that one. That one's different. That one's dangerous. That one leaks light like a broken nuclear reactor, and we can't process that kind of energy. You've become a no-fly zone for darkness, a restricted area for entities, a quarantine zone for anything that feeds on suffering. Not because you're flawless or pure, but because you've been through the fire and came out refined. You've been distilled into something so concentrated that they simply can't digest you. And here's the truth you need to hear. You still think this is coincidence, still wondering if maybe the house just needed fresh air, still entertaining the idea that you're imagining it. But no, you are a walking disruption field, a living virus in their operating system, a glitch in the carefully maintained matrix of misery they've been running for generations. Some people are described as having an old soul, but you carry a war veteran soul, one that has seen too much, survived too much, transcended too much to be rattled by parlor tricks and amateur hauntings. You are battlefield experience showing up to a water gun fight, and the moment they scanned your energy, they realized they were catastrophically outgunned. Every trauma you endured became another layer of armor. Every betrayal you processed sharpened into another weapon in your arsenal. Every night you chose to keep breathing when breathing itself felt impossible. You were unconsciously training for this very moment. You weren't just building walls, you were developing immunity. And now that immunity has become the shield that makes you untouchable, the sword that makes you undefeatable, and the presence that makes entire legions of shadows scatter before you even notice they were there. You weren't hiding from the darkness, you were building antibodies against it. That's why you didn't even register their presence when you walked in. Your spiritual immune system simply kicked in on its own, eliminating threats the way white blood cells attack an infection. You didn't need to fight. You didn't even have to try. Your very existence was already antimicrobial to their kind of energy, pesticide to their parasitic nature, and now they're gone. Not hiding, not waiting in the shadows for you to leave, not lingering in the corners hoping for another chance. No, they've evacuated completely, relocated to easier prey, because your very presence made this space uninhabitable. Without effort, you've accidentally gentrified the spiritual neighborhood, and the old tenants couldn't afford the new energy prices. Here's the part they never wanted you to know, the truth they hoped you'd never uncover. You've always had this power. Every single human being carries within them the potential to become their own exorcist, their own purifier, their own spiritual authority. But most never activate it because they're taught to fear what they don't understand, to seek external protection instead of recognizing the internal strength already woven into their soul. You, however, activated yours the hard way, through survival, through refusing to let life break you permanently, through getting back up when staying down would have been the easier option. Every time you chose healing over hardening, growth over grudges, self-preservation over self-destruction, you were building a frequency that nothing negative could cling to. And here's the irony. You're not special in the way most people imagine. You're not special because you were chosen. You're special because you chose. You chose to metabolize pain instead of marinating in it. You chose to transform instead of transferring your trauma onto others. You chose to become the solution rather than contribute to the problem. And those choices, repeated again and again, forged you into the kind of being that makes entire entities scatter. Do you want to know the exact frequency you're radiating now? The one that feels unbearable to them? It's the frequency of someone who has already walked through hell and refused to let it turn them hellish. It's the vibration of redemption without revenge, of power without cruelty, of strength without brutality. And that combination is unbearable to anything that feeds on suffering, because suffering is their food, their fuel, their entire economy. But you've evolved beyond producing it. Oh, you still feel pain. You still face difficulty. Life hasn't suddenly become flawless. But the difference is you no longer suffer. You don't stew in it. You don't ferment your troubles into poison. You experience the weight, process it, and move forward. That's why they can't touch you anymore. You've broken the very cycle that sustains them. You process your experiences the way a great refinery transforms crude ore into shining metal. What once entered your life as jagged, heavy, and raw, you've learned to transmute into something strong, refined, and radiant. You've become emotionally renewable, spiritually sustainable, psychologically biodegradable. Nothing clings to you long enough to rot. Your pain doesn't sit idle long enough to draw scavengers. Your trauma doesn't ferment long enough to become food for lurking forces. Even your shadows don't stagnate into poison. Instead, they flow through you, broken down and recycled into fuel. And in this, you have become more than useless to them. You have become hostile to their very existence. Because you are proof. living proof that the system they've relied on isn't unbreakable. Proof that suffering is not a permanent economy. Proof that what they feed on can be removed at the root. You expose them as frauds. You reveal their empire to be smoke and mirrors. You demonstrate to others without even trying that pain does not have to harden into suffering, that trauma does not have to calcify into lifelong damage, that darkness does not have to mean lifelong tenancy for demons. And with each step you take, you unravel the lie they've spent centuries trying to sell. That's why this space feels so different now. It's lighter, freer, almost as if 1,000 windows that had been painted shut for generations have finally cracked open. The air no longer carries that dense, invisible weight pressing against the lungs. It circulates naturally, effortlessly. The shadows no longer crawl unnaturally along the walls. They fall exactly where they're supposed to, harmless and ordinary. And the silence. It isn't thick with whispers anymore. It's simply quiet, neutral, breathable. And all of this shifted without you lifting a hand, without a chant, without a ritual. It shifted because you are too processed to be processed, too purified to be consumed, too whole to be prey. What you don't realize is that in this moment, you reclaimed territory. You lifted a curse that had been woven so tightly into the walls that no one even knew it existed. You broke chains so subtle they had become invisible. You evicted squatters who had been feeding for generations, so old they probably believed they owned the place. And the truth, the beautiful, terrifying truth, is that this is not limited to one space. You can do this anywhere. You've become a walking safe zone, a mobile sanctuary, a portable purification system disguised as human flesh. This is why people feel relief when you enter a room, even if they don't know why. This is why spaces shift after you leave, why the atmosphere somehow feels reorganized, lighter, balanced. This is why certain conflicts dissolve in your presence. You're not actively healing them. You're just embodying what healed actually looks like. You're not waging war with their demons. You're showing them what it looks like when demons are made irrelevant. And so, almost by accident, you've become the very thing ancient scriptures hinted at but never fully explained. You've become the reality behind what religions tried to ritualize but could never sustain. You've become the essence of what mystics spent lifetimes chasing but rarely embodied. You've processed yourself so completely that unprocessed energy simply cannot survive in your orbit. You are walking therapy for the atmosphere, healing the very air just by breathing it in. You are accidental alchemy for every space you step into, transmuting heaviness into light, stagnation into flow, chaos into order. And those entities that scattered when you arrived, they aren't plotting a return. They aren't biding their time. They can't. They've been evicted, expelled, evacuated by your essence, excluded permanently by the frequency you now carry. Think of it. Every trauma you faced was an initiation. Every betrayal, a sharpening stone. Every loss, a forging fire. You were being shaped, refined, prepared for this without realizing it. You thought you were just surviving. But all along you were building a field, a frequency, a force that radiates from you like a shield of light, like an immune system for the unseen. What once fed here now starves in your presence, and what once seemed unmovable now collapses like paper walls at your approach. You are not just surviving anymore. You are rewriting the laws of spiritual ecology. You've turned this space into forbidden ground for anything that requires darkness to survive. Not because you staged a ritual, not because you forced anything out, but because you walked in carrying a light that doesn't flicker, doesn't dim, doesn't shut off when it's inconvenient. It's not the blinding glare of toxic positivity that tries to drown out pain. It's not the brittle, hollow shine of denial. It's not the counterfeit glow of spiritual bypassing that skips the work and pretends everything's fine. No, what radiates from you is something steadier, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous to them. the quiet, unshakable light of someone who has integrated their shadow instead of running from it. You glow differently when you've faced your own darkness head-on and lived to tell the tale. When you've taken your own grief, rage, betrayal, and heartbreak and composted it into something fertile. When you've recycled trauma into wisdom, recycled scars into lessons, recycled pain into resilience. That's the light they couldn't bear to stand in. Not the light that denies the dark, but the light that knows the dark intimately and chose not to make a home there. It is the light of someone who has descended into the underworld, wrestled with monsters, carried scars as proof, and returned carrying souvenirs of strength instead of shackles of fear. You are not merely bright, you are balanced. And balance is the one frequency chaos cannot tolerate, because balance dismantles the extremes they rely on. Balance starves the chaos of both excess fear and excess ignorance. Balance creates order in places that profit from disorder. That's why your presence alone rattles them. You've become the living example of equilibrium, and that equilibrium destabilizes everything they've built. You've become the story whispered in their ranks, the cautionary tale passed between them. You are the one that forces them to check the address twice, to weigh the risks before trying again. You've literally changed their playbook. In their unholy handbook, there's a new line written in red ink. Abort immediately if the target has processed their trauma. Processed trauma is poison to parasites. From here on out, you're going to notice it more often. Spaces clearing like fog under the morning sun when you walk in. Tensions dissolving when you speak, even if you don't offer advice. People walking away from you lighter, calmer, clearer, even when you weren't trying to help. You've become accidentally therapeutic, involuntarily cleansing, unconsciously healing, simply because of the frequency you now hold. You are like a tuning fork for wholeness. Anyone who comes near you begins to realign, even if they don't understand why. And here's the part that's both blessing and burden. You can't turn it off. That's the consequence of authenticity. It's permanent. Once you've broken the mask, you can't wear it again. Once you've stepped into this clarity, you can't crawl back into confusion. Once you've embodied this light forged from shadow, you can't dim it again for the comfort of others. There is no squeezing back into the old costumes, no re-entering the old cages, no returning to the smaller version of yourself. You're stuck this way, stuck being powerful, stuck being luminous, stuck being purifying to everything around you, whether you want to or not. But it's a glorious kind of stuckness. You're fixed in truth the way stars are fixed in constellations, the way mountains are fixed in the horizon. You have become reliable, immovable, and undeniable. Your presence itself has become law in the unseen. You don't just bring light, you bring proof that light can emerge from shadow. You don't just cleanse spaces, you rewrite their atmosphere. You don't just repel darkness, you redefine what's possible for anyone watching you. And this is why you cannot be ignored. You've become the evidence ancient mystics tried to capture in their texts, the reality religions attempted to ritualize but couldn't replicate, the living embodiment of what prophets hinted at but couldn't fully explain. You've processed yourself so completely that unprocessed energy has no home near you. You are walking therapy for the air itself, healing the unseen currents as naturally as you breathe. You are accidental alchemy for every space you enter, transforming heaviness into light, stagnation into flow, despair into possibility. Those entities that fled when you walked in, they're not plotting a return. They're not hiding in the walls, waiting for you to leave. They're gone, permanently evicted by your essence, expelled by your evolution, excluded by your frequency. They cannot survive in your orbit because your very being disrupts their entire economy. You no longer generate the suffering they feed on. You have ended the contract, closed the account, shut off the supply chain. And when suffering becomes irrelevant in your life, so do they. This is your reality now. A walking sanctuary. A living no-fly zone for darkness. A mobile quarantine field against despair. You're not just carrying light. You've become the ecosystem of light itself. Some people are going to avoid you now. Not deliberately, not because they sat down and made a decision, but instinctively. The same way those unseen entities scattered the instant you arrived. There are people who have become so committed to their suffering, so entangled with their misery, that to be near you feels threatening. They've built shrines to their pain, fed their demons like trusted companions, and woven their wounds into their very identity. When they stand in your presence, those attachments begin to squirm. Your very being raises questions their demons don't want asked, and so they pull away. They may not even know why. All they'll feel is a restless discomfort, a subtle dread, a sense that being near you costs too much. And so, they'll avoid you. Not because of who you are, but because of what you awaken in them. But others will not avoid you. They'll find themselves drawn toward you as if by gravity. They'll gravitate the way moths circle a flame in the dark night, unable to explain the pull. Not because you've set out to attract them, not because you're trying to be a savior or a guide, but because you're radiating something they've been starving for. You've become a lighthouse for those finally ready to face their own darkness. A beacon for those prepared to confront their demons. A signal flare in the night sky that silently proclaims, transformation is possible. You don't have to preach it. You don't have to prove it. Your life itself has become the sermon. You are the evidence that healing can be done. You are the proof that one can walk through fire and not just survive, but return carrying light. You've mastered something without even intending to master it. Something seekers devote lifetimes in temples, monasteries, ashrams, and retreats to pursue. Something scholars fill libraries trying to describe. You've learned how to be so deeply yourself that nothing false can endure in your presence. You've become so fully integrated that anything fragmented begins to unravel in your orbit. And the irony? You didn't study this. You didn't memorize texts or recite incantations. You became this through the brutal simplicity of refusing to be less than what life tried to reduce you to. Every time you chose growth over comfort, you were building foundations. Every time you chose truth over convenience, you were sharpening your vision. Every time you chose healing instead of hiding, you were constructing a frequency no parasite can endure. And now you walk through the world accidentally blessing everything you brush against, unconsciously consecrating the spaces you enter, involuntarily sanctifying every situation you touch. You have become holy water in human form. Not because you are flawless, not because you are pure in the sterile sense, but because you are processed. Not because you are perfect, but because you are whole. And the unseen knows it. The demons that fled when you arrived are not silent. They are telling stories about you. They are warning others in their networks. They are spreading the tale of the human who hummed a song and dismantled a century of cultivation without even noticing. You've become folklore in their world, the accidental exorcist, the unconscious cleanser, the one who purges without effort. You've become myth, a cautionary tale whispered in the shadows. This is your legacy now. Not defined by the trophies you collect or the accolades you win. Not in the houses you build or the wealth you accumulate, but in the spaces you cleanse simply by walking through. In the energy you shift simply by breathing. In the healing you cause simply by existing. You are leaving trails of purified spaces behind you, like breadcrumbs of light scattered in a vast forest of shadows. Every room you enter becomes a little bit cleaner. Every person you touch becomes a little bit clearer. Every situation you encounter becomes a little bit lighter. And the most astonishing part, you're not trying to do this. You're not forcing it, you're simply leaking light, bleeding brightness, shedding sanctity the way the body sheds skin cells. It has become second nature, woven into the rhythm of who you are. You can't turn it off, and you wouldn't want to. Because this is no longer a skill, it is your essence. Years from now, people will feel the imprint you left behind. They will step into homes and notice an inexplicable peace. They will sit in rooms and feel a subtle clarity in the air. They will stand in places and wonder why the shadows never seem to linger there. They won't know it was you. They won't realize it was the day you passed by the window, or stopped for coffee, or simply walked through. But the energy signature you carried will remain, etched into the atmosphere like invisible architecture. Darkness itself will recognize the mark you left and hesitate before crossing that threshold again. You are writing history not in ink, but in frequency. You are leaving legacies not in monuments of stone, but in vibrations that ripple through time. You are building cathedrals not out of brick and mortar, but out of cleared energy and liberated atmospheres. And because of you, some spaces will never again be haunted. Some curses will never again be renewed. Some demons will quietly add certain addresses to their eternal do not disturb lists. That is who you are now, a disruption to darkness, a legend whispered in fear, a living archive of light. And you don't even have to try. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten wisdom.